Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I haven't done an afternoon show on this channel in a little while. It's been a week or two. Other than the market report, like a secondary show. Why I'm doing it today is because it's finally actually starting to happen. And, you know, when people get nervous and scared and they start moving money around, they can, it's almost like panic, you know? People are aware. Financial investors are aware right now of what's going on within the system. Gotta give them more credit than we give them credit. They understand that there's surmounting problems in the whole global system right now. So many I can't even count. And it's all of these things coming together, but one of the big things right now is this trade war. Donald Trump announced 300 billion more tariffs on goods. It's gonna cover everything from cell phones to shoes. 10% across the board on 300. This is the remaining amount of Chinese goods that's coming into the country. Chinese, I guess, are probably not too keen on this. They're probably very upset. They're probably going to have some sort of retaliatory measures that they're going to weigh against us, you know, in retaliation. So this is heating up between the Chinese and Donald Trump. This alone can turn the world economy downwards. China is slumping, and now with this new 300 billion more, is going to really affect supply chains, distribution, factory inventories, across the board. It's going to speed up this slowdown that's already taken place. Yes, if nothing had happened, if we hadn't been in a trade war, we might have got away with another year before this recession starts. But this is speeding everything up, speeding up the process. And today we're finally starting to see a reaction within the markets. Not just in the stock market. But they hammered treasuries on the long side of the yield curve today. They were purchasing them like they were going out of style. Like it was hot donuts covered with glaze. They were buying them up, you know. And just pow, 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 pow. And the treasury yields were falling like crazy all day long. So on some of the yields on the longer end of the yield curve, we saw 15 basis points. One day. This is panic. Panic buying. Panic buying. A gold market, we've seen the same thing today. You know? We've seen it shoot up. We haven't seen that kind of energy in gold in how long, guys? How long since you've seen that kind of energy come into gold? This is what happens. When it gets like this, like it is right now, like a pot that's almost ready to boil, what can happen is investors out there are so nervous and shaky, for no reason whatsoever, they can pull out of an asset and into another asset class. Just because one guy does it, they'll all follow. They're like a herd. But they're scared. And money's moving around really fast. So we see the gold market, we see earlier today. I mean, this rally in the gold market took me off guard a little bit. I didn't see this coming. When I did my show this morning, I did not see this actually coming this afternoon, you know. But it's all a result of what's starting to begin. Now, the cryptocurrency market, you guys, probably a lot of you guys are in cryptocurrency. When investors are like this, they could just as easily move in or out. My tendency is to think that they're probably going to move in, but they could move out too. It would just take one guy. Now, these whales have been toying with the market for about the last month. You know, they've been making all kinds of money off of it. But it's the market, the Bitcoin market, in the financial system itself right now, it's like a toy that investors can play with. But that's all it is, because it's not big enough It's not a big enough, it's not a new enough, it's a new market, it's not real big, it's not real well established yet. Let's face it, back in 2008, when we had the last crisis, that market didn't even exist. So it's a new market. But just exactly what investors will do with it, I'm not exactly sure. They could. Now, I'm not saying they will, but they could move into it massively. Because, for one thing, you see, it's the best performing asset class of the year so far. You know? And they're all looking for yield. And, I mean, if it does start to pop like that and go way up high, that'll yield more of them. Will see it and start to want to come into it, you know? And it just generates more energy if it's going on the up, if it's on the upswing. If it's on the downswing, it generates negative energy in the opposite direction. You know? So we're going to have to wait and see with that. But gold and silver, you're going to see more days like this coming up in the not too distant future. As investors get scared, they're showing you which way and which direction they're going to run. Gold and silver is a sure bet. You know, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is more of a, well, I'm not going to say it's a sure bet because I don't want you guys to use this as financial advice when I talk about gold and silver. You know, but here's one of the things about gold, silver, and cryptocurrencies that they share. If you hold your cryptocurrency on your own wallet with your own private keys, there's no counterparty risk. If you hold your cryptocurrency on the exchange, there's counterparty risk and you could lose your cryptocurrency. Now, it's the same way with gold and silver. You hold your gold and silver in your own hand, there's no counterparty risk. If you've got it, your gold and silver in the vaulting company, who owns the vaulting company? The bank. Counterparty risk. And the stocks are the same way. Bonds, I consider them to have huge counterparty risk. And the reason why is because the United States is basically bankrupt. It's a bankrupt entity. They could never pay this debt back. They're only going to pay this debt back with newly printed money, and that means what you can purchase with your bonds. I mean, you're only getting a minuscule amount of interest on them anyway. But when you consider how inflation's going to run away pretty soon, it doesn't look like quite as good of an investment. But yeah, I don't think the United States will ever default on the debt. This is the position I've taken. There's two ways they can go with this. They can either default on the debt and never pay anybody back, these bonds and everything else. The system would get crushed. They're not going to do that. They're just going to keep paying everything off with newly printed money. This is the way they're going to go, but this is going to take the dollar down. And when you see these other asset classes like gold and silver rising, cryptocurrencies rising, after a while, it's not going to be too long down the road before investors are going to say, hey, you know what? I don't want to be on that train to the bottom. They're going to lose confidence in the dollar. This is what's coming. It's a dollar crisis that's coming. And it's also a crisis in government, especially in Europe. It's going to be terrible in Europe because basically I can see in the future the erosion of the European Union itself, a collapse in the euro, and what's going to happen is these former they're still states. They haven't changed like Italy and France and these countries. They're still sovereign states, but they're member states of the European Union. They go back to being sovereign states only, and the European Union doesn't exist anymore. This is what I see coming. Then they're going to have to go back to their old currencies in one form or another. And this is going to take, if this happens suddenly, which I think it's going to, it's going to cause a massive chaos in Europe. Because what will happen is they have supply side distribution where they bring trucks in. They'll truck like from Italy over to Spain and bring other trucks from Spain over to Italy, and they run these trucks and bring in produce and food and everything else, you know, and clothing and everything else, trade between these countries that are all member states of the European Union. When they suddenly shift and now they become individual states again, they're going to have to work out trade between them. Otherwise, the supply side distribution is going to get stopped at each one of these little borders in Europe. If you can see a problem with this, I can see a huge problem with this. And then what happens? What happens then? I mean, because they'll have to establish some sort of way of moving food and everything else, and it's just going to be an enormous nightmare to try to solve this problem. I mean, the European Union kind of solved that problem for a while, you know? But if they go back to each being individual states with individual sovereignty, and they do it, and it happens suddenly, the European Union collapses suddenly, and the currency of the European Union, it's just going to create a scrambled mess, a hot mess over in Europe. Now, while they're trying to sort it all out, well, I mean, supply side distribution could get cut off for months. This means no restocking of the grocery stores in Europe. It means Europe would turn into Venezuela, the whole entirety of Europe. And the people in Europe, they've been used to a certain standard of living that's basically supported by the ECB, their standard of living, and all of a sudden that rug is dragged right out from underneath their feet? What kind of a situation is that going to create with how the people are going to react to this or respond to this? Because if the people respond in a very negative fashion across Europe in general, then they're going to make it more difficult to reestablish these sovereign states like Italy and Portugal and Spain and everything, and France. They're going to have to reestablish themselves and reestablish their own currencies and everything else. It's just going to be a logistical nightmare. And if they got the people going crazy because they're not getting what they want and the food stores are empty and everything else, the whole thing could just melt down into a giant blob of craziness, if you understand what I'm saying. And in that state, you got 500 million people. Who's going to restore the if it goes into that kind of a state of just melting down into craziness, who's going to restore order in order to get it back and normalize it again? Who's a big enough entity to have the power to go in there and restore order in all these individual states? If each individual state is... can you see the mess when I'm explaining it to you? Can you see how this could turn into the worst mess we've ever had? This is why I say the crisis is going to be centered in Europe. And we'll probably make out pretty good over here because at the very worst, I mean, they might establish a curfew or something, or they might give us, just like they did in World War II, when they would give you stamps to buy your gasoline, and they give you stamps to, they ration, it's called rationing. And they give each household a certain amount of ration, and they ration food and stuff. And then the military and stuff takes care of law and order, working in conjunction with the police departments and stuff, and they keep everything up and running and not crazy. It doesn't melt down into craziness. That's basically the way I see it over here. It probably won't melt down into craziness. But, I mean, so we're facing... This has all been caused because we have suddenly, in the past number of years, deviated from the normal, and we've went into this monetary policy that expands the money supply, and then in the end it comes to a certain point, because it is a Ponzi scheme. It comes to a certain point where it has to contract, and then they have to expand it again. In other words, They blow the bubble so big that the skin of the balloon is stretched where it's going to go bang. And the more they put in, the tighter stretched the skin is. And so when it pops quicker. It pops with a bang. But then they have to rush in. They just can't let it completely implode on itself and completely explode, because then it would take everything down. So they have to rush in and blow the bubble back up. It takes more every time. It's a Ponzi scheme. Listen, thank you guys for listening. We'll catch you in the next show. Bye-bye.